Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Hello everyone, Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. I hope this finds you in good health and secure. I wanted to talk a little bit today before I jump into some more translations. I think a lot of us in this Sangha, not all of us, but many of us, have come to Nichiren's doctrine of Lotus Sutra Buddhism from or through exposure of NSA, Nichiren Shoshu of America, SGI, the Ikeda groups, or Nichiren Shoshu Temple directly. Since World War II and Jose Toda, his incarceration and his friendship with Ikeda, Jose Toda was determined to rebuild Japan. It was a very nationalistic time, even though they were forced to surrender in World War II. There was a backlash in Japan about that, and Jose Toda was a Nichiren Shoshu follower. And his dedication was to raise the country back up through that sect and his association with that sect. And that's the foundation of everything that comes after Nichiren Shoshu and laity related. Now, they've had major battles to the point where the temple at Nichiren Shoshu was completely demolished and taken down, and their main mandala moved to another building. Some really, throw-down arguments between the laity and the temple. And I don't want to get into all of that other than to reference that, because a lot of us in the West know Buddhism through that relationship, whatever side you fall on. And you've heard me talk about this before. It's my own personal opinion after doing lots of research on all of this, that there's an ego problem with that sect. It's obvious in Daisaku Ikeda's organizations, and that's what they argue about and fought about with the head temple at the Fuji school of Shoshu. That is the crux of their big fallouts all the time. And so it got me to thinking, well, how prevalent is this? What's the history of this? And what's it look like? So I found a nice little document online that summarizes it rather well. Because, frankly, I don't want to make this our topic of discussion. But before I go into reading translations of the Anko, what the heck is it called now? All of you know about the Angikuden because that's the Nichiren Shoshu side of things. Now, you may not have known that, though. And the other side, by all of the other sects, all of them, would reference the Anko Kikigaki. So I wanted to because I've researched this and because there's a lot of scholarship about this, some very erudite academics, not opinion pieces, have broken this down. And, after Nichiren died, Nichiren had designated 6 of his senior priests, not his only, or priests, monks, teacher monks, in other words, 6 of them to help proselytize and move his elucidations of Lotus Sutra Buddhism out into Japan, right? That was Nichiren's mission all along, as we well know from studying some of the Gosho, right? And there's more to come on that, by the way. So what the consistency of scholarship says is that after Nichiren died, in Minobu, at Mount Minobu, where everybody was gathered for the last several years of Nichiren's life, is where his base of operations was. And there was a big fallout between Nikko with 2 Ks and the rest of the senior monks. The one that's historically identified is between Nikko with 2 Ks and Nikko with 1 K. I'm sorry, I don't know how else to make obvious and it's confusing because when you say Nikko, you think if you're Nichiren Shoshu exposed that there's only one, Nikko with 2 Ks. And there's actually another one with 1 K, and he established the Mount Minobu school, along with the other senior monks who established their own temples in that area. And now I'll read from the document, and maybe this will make a little bit more sense. Shortly before his death, Nichiren designated 6 senior disciples to assume leadership of his community. Renge Ajari Nichiji, Iyoko Nichyo, Sadoko Nikko with 1 K, Byakuren Ajari Nikko with 2 Ks, that's the one we're most familiar with, right? Daikoku Ajari Nichiro and Ben Ajari Nisho. Nichiji, the first one, is said to have embarked in 1295 on a journey. Now, Nichiren died in 1282, so this is more than a decade after he passed away. Nichiji embarked on a journey to northern China to spread Nichiren's teachings abroad, and then the history kind of falls apart. We don't know what happened to him. The others proselytized chiefly in eastern Japan. Congregations formed around them and their successors, giving rise to the first lineages of the Hokkeshu, or the Lotus sect, as Nichiren's followers would be known in medieval times. Mount Minobu in Kai Province, Yamanashi Prefecture today, where Nichiren had spent his last years, held special significance for the sect as a whole. In addition, each lineage established its own major temple or temples, which served as centers of propagation and monastic education. Branch temple networks formed as new temples were built or others converted. Within a half a century of his death, 50 years, Nichiren's teachings had spread throughout Japan. Now, in the meantime, early on, it says, Nikko's with 2 Ks, he broke away from all of the others. They had an argument about Nichiren's doctrines. And Nikko with 2 Ks obviously didn't agree with the other 5. To me, that sounds like ego. And he took off. Screw Minobu. And he went to Mount Fuji and established the now known Fuji School, which later, from a sect called Nichiren Shoshu. Not at that moment, but later. So from this Fuji school that broke away from the other disciples Do you see the foundations of Nichiren Shoshu leading to SGI? I think it's glaringly obvious, but it's also really fascinating, isn't it? So Minobu was the center of Nichiren's propagation efforts, and from there it grew. But as it grew, or before it took over Japan, one of the 6 disciples decides, "The hell with y'all, I'm going over here, I'm going to do my own thing." And I think this is where we get the confusion that we'll be able to identify in the Angikuden, because the Angikuden is said to have been written, and none of this is proven, but it's said to have been written by Nikko with 2 Ks, who split off from everyone, as a document of notes he made during Nichiren's education to the disciples. They're his notes, Nikko's notes. And I started to read the Angikuden the other day, and you remember the first sentence, I'm like, that's not Nichiren. It's really obvious. So I think that's fascinating. I think that's reason enough to read it, but I think it's a better reason to read it when you find out that the Anko Kikigaki are the same kind of document, notes written during Nichiren's education of his senior disciples, by Nikko with 1 K. So there's 2 competing documents here. Neither are absolutely verified because they don't exist anymore. There's only the originals, The originals there's no holograph of them. But there's plenty of records historically pointing to them. And we'll get into that because they don't show up until several hundred years after Nichiren's passing. So did some monk of these lineages decide to make this document and backdate it and claim that Nikko with 1 K or Nikko with 2 Ks wrote it? Is this a sectarian document to add some kind of oomph to their sect as being primary? Because as I've talked about before, that's the history of everything, let alone Buddhism. There's always some branch that wants to claim all of them are wrong. We're the only ones who know the truth, right? I mean, this is human history. So what happened? We may never know, but there's a lot of clues, and they show up in character of the certain sects. It's kind of fascinating. Now, you may not be interested in all of this, but it's a video it's a talk that I've long wanted to have without having a lot of vitriol associated with it. I think it's just that we need to know what we're studying. We need to have confidence in what we're studying. Yes? I certainly do. So this is why I do this research, because I want to know, this is why they always said that. It's got to be this. And as Shakyamuni told us, study all the scholarship, right? Because if you study all of it, sometimes the most opinionated pieces become very transparent in how they deviate from the others. That doesn't mean they're wrong, but it does point out where the differences are. And I think that's important for us to know so that we can make up our own mind as to what's important for us at any given point. Not that we can't change our minds, right? That's samsara. And that's what we're trying to do with Buddhism in its entirety, is change our mind. So yeah, it's important, I think. So early on, Nikko's Fuji lineage broke away from the others. Nikko, with 2 Ks, successors would claim retrospectively that he alone had been Nichiren's true Dharma heir, which is, how can you claim that when you know that there were 6 of them and they were based at Minobu and they founded temples of Nichiren's doctrine throughout Japan, and some hundreds of years later, you're going to say, yeah, but Nikko with two Ks, he was the only real heir. See, things start to get really doubtful when you start to learn this stuff, and that's why a lot of people have turned off to Nichiren Shoshu, or SGI, or NSA, or whatever you want to call them, and found a lot of emotional betrayal in those groups for making these assumptions and declaring themselves superior when, in fact, they're just bold claims of politics, political favoritism. It comes down to money as well as ego. Ego. Oh, there's the ego thing, right? The big fight between Daisaku Ikeda and the Nichiren Shoshu head temple. It happened 3 times they were excommunicated. That last one was major. This damn ego thing. And here it is. It's historic. So I want to study Nichiren's philosophy and his insights into the Lotus Sutra. Now, I don't want to have all of that tainted by some political agenda. I don't want that in the way of my practice. Certainly not in the way of the mandala. That's why we use a Nichiren inscribed mandala, because I don't want us to get influenced by all that crud. The first schism was a decisive one. To this day, Nichiren Shoshu, the chief modern successor of the Fuji school, maintains its own distinctive interpretations. Further schisms and new lineage formation would occur during the 14th through the 16th centuries due to geographic separations, institutional rivalry, and the differences of interpretation. And after 1333, when the Kamakura shogunate was overthrown and the locus of political power shifted back to the imperial capital at Kyoto, Hokkei monks began to proselytize there. Nichiro's disciple took the lead in this endeavor. Nichizo established the Shijo lineage, and Nichijo the Rokuyo lineage, followed by representatives of the other Hokkei-shu branches. In the predominantly rural East, Hokkei temples were supported chiefly by the patronage of the provincial warriors or other local landowners. In the western cities of Kyoto, Sakai, however, while attracting some warrior and even aristocratic followers, the Hokkei-shu drew its major support from the emerging urban mercantile class, whose wealth enabled the sect to prosper. By the mid-15th century, there were 21 Hokkei temples in Kyoto, and about half the city's population, it is said, were Nichiren followers. Despite institutional friction and differences of interpretation, the Hokkei-shu shared doctrinal foundations with Tendai, and Hokkei monks often studied at major Tendai centers, such as Enraku-ji on Mount Hiei, near Kyoto, or Tendai seminaries in the east. Nonetheless, they upheld a strong sense of independent Hokkei-shu identity and actively practiced shakabuku by preaching, writing, and debating. Because as the real definition of shakabuku is Nichiren's railing against the other sects of Shakyamuni's teachings, their interpretations, mainly Zen and, was it Shingon? Come on, Sylvain. Is it in here? But certainly, Nembutsu, the Amida Buddha cult, and the Zen teachings, and anyway, Shakabuku was specifically directed to those other schools of Buddhism. There's differing ideas about what that word means in the West. I just wanted to make sure to say that. From time to time, temple abbots and lineage heads followed Nichiren's example of admonishing the state by submitting letters of remonstration to local or shogunal officials, or occasionally to the shogun or emperor himself, urging a policy of exclusive devotion to the Lotus Sutra for the country's peace and prosperity. Repeated remonstrations sometimes provoked the official wrath, and the sect's hagiographical tradition celebrates those monks who, like Nichiren, endured persecution from the authorities in the course of their proselytizing efforts. Then it gets into tensions and controversies, and I'm really not interested in going over that. But I just wanted to read that because foundationally, it's very important to understand, and this is why you hear me repeat, that we study Nichiren's scholarship of the Lotus Sutra practice. Because that's what Nichiren did. These remonstration, and his senior disciples after him remonstrating with the government for what? Adoption of Lotus Sutra practice solely as being the path toward security and prosperity for the nation, thereby the nation's people, of course, right? It sounds nationalist, and some laity sects rose up and used Nichiren's doctrine as a nationalistic fervor, right? This all occurred after World War II, don't forget. So there's books out there you can find that talk about these different sects from their point of view. There's so much information that it can make your head spin. But the thing that's centrally important for you and I to realize is that we are Lotus Sutra practicing Buddhists with Nichiren's insights, Nichiren's guidance, Nichiren's example of how to practice this ultimate teaching of the Lotus Sutra immediately, correctly, directly from Shakyamuni's transmission, not only with his insights, but remember, Nichiren first entered into his scholarship of Buddhism through the Tendai sect. He was a Tendai monk. Age 16, he took his vows. So the lineage of Nichiren through Saicho and Miaolo and Tendai, Chi, all the way back to Shakyamuni. We can never forget that it doesn't start with Chi, but Chi was the first in China to organize and to there's a lot of words I could use here that I don't want to mislead you. There was a tremendous amount of scholarship and versions and sectarian interpretations throughout Japan in the 6th century, right? That was really the third 500-year period after Shakyamuni's passing. We could argue second or third, whatever, is like 1,000 years after Shakyamuni's passing. So by that time, the teachings had spread throughout India and down south into Burma, or was it Myanmar today, and Sri Lanka, all of that, and overland to China, northern China, southern China. China is a huge place, so north and south makes a big difference. And again, the politics of the day and looking for financial support, right, influenced a lot of these different temples and groups. And yet, Chi comes along, very erudite, well-educated, and he starts sifting through all of these different interpretations, schools, doctrines, and documents, and it becomes very obvious to him, this doesn't belong. This is something that was added. And then once he gets the chaff out of the way and he's looking at this huge body of works, they start to have patterns within them. And because of his erudition and his recognizing historically of how these things come to be, and the translators over time, he discerns 4 periods of teaching, 5 periods actually, but 4 stages, if you will. Anyway, he documents all this really, really, really well, and he puts it in a proper order of the teachings, of the stages of the teachings. And it becomes obvious how Shakyamuni, in his day, 1,000 years ago to him, had lived his life and taught in periods to assist others, to teach to others how they can start to adopt and learn the path to enlightenment. And it starts with the early teachings, and then the teachings evolve to another stage, and yet another stage. Anyway, he formalizes the canon, if you will. And that sticks. Everybody in debate, in scholarship debates, in government decrees, he challenges all of these other schools, these other monks, these other disciplines or sects. And he just easily demonstrates where they're wrong, where they're right, where they need to adjust. He becomes the great clarifier of Buddhism in 6th century China. But that doesn't mean he invented anything in Buddhism other than a proper scholarship, a proper lineage. And so this is where Nichiren actually enters the picture, not in the 6th century, but in the lineage of scholarship. He, in his studies of Tendai, Chi's Buddhism, as it has migrated through China and Miaolo to Japan, through the different educators in Japan, up to Saicho, Dengyo, Daishi, right? That man, himself a great reformer of errant disciplines and opinions, establishes the Tendai school in Japan. And then after his death, we all know, we've read many times together through the Gosho, how Nichiren identified these offshoots that weren't following correctly. And then Nichiren adds, because Nichiren is in now the 5th 500-year period after that Shakyamuni identified, somebody will come up and clear this stuff up again in the latter day of the law that's going to last 10,000 years. And this is identified as Nichiren by his own recognition after his own proselytizing for many years. In his exile to Sado, he realizes the reason he's being persecuted, and we read his laments. Why is this happening to me? And he reasons out that it's happening to him because he's the guy. He's the guy in this modern era who's going to straighten this out. No wonder he's incurring such resistance. So he identifies himself as the Lotus Sutra's Shakyamuni's description of Bodhisattva superior practices, Bodhisattva Jogyo. Not a reincarnation, because it was never an incarnation in the first place, but that responsibility, that personage, right? An idea, an all-encompassing idea of a mission, of a dedication, of a life. We call that Bodhisattva superior practices, but it's not an actual person. It's an ideology that's wrapped in something we give a name to. This is what we do in samsara. We label things. So all of us are Bodhisattva superior practices when we are practicing our Gangyo, our Daimoku, and we tell other people about it, or if they're curious, we have them join us, or we influence other people about it. We are acting like Bodhisattva superior practices, because that's a behavioral definition, a mission definition, right? And Nichiren identifies himself with that mission task, and that gives him courage and support emotionally to continue what he's doing. He's on the right path. And this is Nichiren's whole story, right? So we're emulating exactly what he's doing. And for the purposes of this video, I'll change things around here. I don't know where anything is. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Yeah. I guess that's the main thing I wanted to talk about today in this little chat, that we all understand that practicing our enlightenment, achieving our enlightenment, is something that is cellular, beneath cellular, that we don't always know. In life, we see habits that we make, and we like some of them, and we don't like some others. It's obvious to us. Changing those habits is no small thing. But what's even more amazing is that we're so unaware of so many of the tendencies that we have, that we just do without even conscious awareness. And I want you to have confidence that when you chant Namu Myoho Renge Kyo, when you practice this Buddhism, you are opening, experiencing your Buddha mind. You may not see actual evidence of, wow, the furniture's turned purple because I chanted today. It's not that obvious. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you'll be chanting for change in your life, and it won't even be specific. It won't be change that behavior, change this. It'll be just, I'm ready to have a different experience of life. I'm ready for my Buddha to take control. That kind of way. When you practice like that, changes happen in your tendencies, in your life, that you had no idea were influencing your experience of life. And you may just notice one day, things are different. I haven't seen that person in months. They never talk to me anymore. And I don't miss them because they were not a good influence. But that's weird. I didn't say anything or do anything, did I? And then our little guilt messages going, whatever. But then we come to realize it's because I'm living more in my Buddha-ness. And it's protecting me from that kind of influence. And certain opportunities are happening now that I don't know if I ever experienced that before. Or if I did, I didn't know what to think of it. This is because karmically, cellularly, energetically, your life is changing. And you may notice certain habits have curtailed, and you'll know that you've changed, and that's great. But a lot of the other habits that you have, the tendencies that you have, you, while being unaware, have been changing, shedding away, or being revolutionized in a positive way, and you're not even aware of it, right? Because samsara. But your environment is reflecting that change. So please be aware of that, as your environment sings exactly what you are performing. And when we practice, especially the longer we practice, that is where we can identify the change of our own mind. Our own Buddha nature is influencing the world around us in a way we've never have before, and therefore the world around us reflects that change. And our life condition continues to get higher is better, labels, but more truthful, more reflective of our potential, and conversely, the reason we're practicing in the first place is as that expression becomes more supportive, potential, actualizing, there becomes less and less stress and anxiety. Things just seem to move on a little easier. That's not to say there'll never be obstacles, but the obstacles will be of a different nature because they won't be obstacles created from old karma that was keeping us from this experience. That's how this Buddhism works. We tend to, because of the way we've been exposed to Buddhism largely by egotistical organizations, we tend to want to see these massive shifts. And, they may happen, but Buddhism works much more subtly in the very stuff that creates our experience of life. So please have confidence in that too. That's going on. Whether you see the massive shift or not, you will. Just stay steadfast. Okay? That's why Nichiren spoke so much about resolve, determination. Have a strong mind toward this Buddha-ness that you already have. Just make it run the boat. Okay? And I'm going to leave you with that, and then we'll get back into reading some more translations. They're really fascinating. There's always a lesson in them. And I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for liking, subscribing, sharing, all of that. Download the podcast. You guys are downloading them a lot. That's really wonderful. Don't forget the bookstore and the website, threefoldlotus.com. And I will see you in the next one. Take care of your health. Be kind. Bye for now.